All right. Good afternoon. Today is November 25th, 2020. It's 5:09, and we are here for the training subcommittee of the Salt Lake City Racial Equity and Policing Commission. And on the call so far, we have Commissioner Andrew Weirden, Commissioner Prospero, Commissioner Hawkins, and Commissioner Davis, and from the city staff, David Littback, and community member Sherry Whitwer. So thank you for your attendance today, the day before Thanksgiving. So I know certainly the day after Thanksgiving, nobody's going to be moving, so good to see everyone. Let's see, I had sent out the agenda. Hopefully everyone saw the agenda and just some thoughts that I had regarding some of the presentation from last time. Wanted to see if there's any comments on the meeting minutes that were sent out from the last session that kind of detailed the presentation from Captain Mortis and anybody else, but just to see if there were any thoughts on that, the meeting minutes specifically.
Just one comment. I'm sure you saw the letter in response to the captain's comments from last time.
The letter in response? No, I don't think I saw a letter.
Yeah, there was a lady that was on the meeting from the community who had a response to his comments, and she basically said that she disagreed with everything that he said.
Oh, are you regarding CIT? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and that person who wrote that letter is on the call with us this afternoon. So
right.
Yes, I did see that. Thank you. And I had said we weren't going to really discuss that presentation on CIT this evening, but it would certainly be on the next upcoming agenda or so. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Okay, great. So
Dante?
Yes.
Just one quick clarification. That letter actually was not from Sherry. It was from a Miss Ginger Phillips, who works with peer support specialists.
Oh, okay.
Who was on the previous call.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. So just moving through the agenda, we have no youth committee members present, but Commissioner Prospero, if you had anything to report from the Youth Commission related to training?
No. Right now they're going through finals.
Okay.
And the two that I did convince to come into, they were actually in the school safety committee earlier. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Dante, could I just throw out that in the policy and recruitment and retention committee, issue of training and FTOs and that retention has come up. So there's going to be a real crossover between some of the work we're doing,
okay,
some of the areas that they're looking at.
Right.
And I think that's a healthy thing. We all knew there'd be crossover in our committees, but
sure,
we're really drilling into some of those same questions that we've been asking.
Excellent, excellent. So, no, that's great, because then, and certainly, obviously, each of the facilitators, you know, we collaborate with each other, so we'll be able to really see what kind of connectivity we can really have with these questions. Okay. I wanted to just see what type of any conversation or any thoughts people had with the captain's presentation last time. Certainly we saw the response regarding CIT, which was, I think, the presentation before that, maybe not, but just thoughts on his presentation. And then I have the additional responses that we got from Lieutenant Arnott, as well as the other additional responses from Captain Marcus in writing. So I think all of that is in play. Just any general thoughts or comments from folks, and I think I put a couple questions or my own comments in the email that I sent you So we'd love to see or hear from you, your comments and responses to his presentation from last time. I can start it out and just kind of repeating what I think I put in the email. The response, the written response that came from Captain Mortgus on November 19th around, the question was, what are the demographics of the FTOs and how are they selected? One, he didn't answer the question about demographics because I don't think he knows it, but we put in a very specific request for the demographics of the FTOs, field training officers. And his response said that it's representative of the department as a whole, and the process mimics the department's hiring process. So just as I went back to looking at the demographic data that was presented from HR about the police department, the numbers I pulled up are specifically this. I have about 644 total employees of the police department, although I had to put another request in to say how many of these are sworn and how many are non-sworn, because this didn't tell me, it was just an aggregate number of police department. In the specifically people of color, in the chief's office, there's 1. In operations, 1 out of 12. In operations, there's 44 out of 309, which is 14%. In admin and support, out of 256 people, there's 33, which is 13%. In emergency management, there's 1 out of 6, 16%. At the airport, there's 16 out of 61, which is 26%. And so and they have them broken down demographically by race or ethnicity. And so what I saw was a total of, in all the divisions, a total of 1 Black female, 1 Asian female, 2 Latinas, 2 Black men, 1 Native male, 4 Asian males, 10 Pacific Islander males, and 23 Latinos males. So that's the total breakdown of the department from the numbers that I saw. So I won't even comment on that. I just wanted to put the information out there. As he said, it's representative of the department. I think that statement speaks for itself. And so,
Dante,
yes.
did you say there was only 4 females of color? Is that what you said?
There is females of color, there are 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't know if they're on patrol. I don't know if they're, sworn or non-sworn. It didn't say, but that's the number that I saw of color, a total of 4. And Lieutenant Zayas obviously would be 1. And that would be the 1 Black female, assuming she identifies as Black and not Latina. So.
Or both.
Yeah.
One question on the FTOs. Are the FTOs? I think Steve and I had talked about it already. Are the FTOs under training, or are they under patrol?
I don't remember what
Steve,
Captain said.
Do you know?
My recollection is that's part of the gap in asking the training division questions about FTO is because it is in patrol and specifically in the Pioneer precinct.
That's what it was, right?
Yeah, and then there's some conversation back and forth about any issues that came up during training that maybe they're seeing in the field training. Yeah, so I'm curious about that gap, but that's my recollection is it's different, which may be why.
Yeah, my recollection also was that they were patrol people who were volunteering to be FTOs.
Right.
Yeah, so the trainers, the actual field training officers are in patrol, but the whole program, as I understand it, is hosted in the patrol division as well.
Yes.
Right,
I
right.
do recall that.
Do they get some extra funds for being a field training officer?
Or is there a paid differential, you mean?
Yes.
That I
For
don't
some
know.
reason, I think I read that or saw that somewhere, but I'm not sure if it was with Salt Lake PD.
Mhm. Yeah, that I don't know.
Anyway, for me, it's if they're field training officers, they should be under training, so like that, they're working on training, then they could go on patrol and then come back and say, this is what our patrol officers are doing, right? And they could start, they're working with their own leadership rather than having the pressure of having to work with patrol. That's, apparently that leadership will be under the FTO, it will be over FTOs, and the FTOs would be over here and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is how we could make things better, X, and Z. This is what we've trained, but this is what we're seeing out here. They're really doing a great on 80% of it, but we got 20% to do, or whatever it may be,
Right.
I'm just thinking that doesn't make sense that it's in patrol, not under training, but there may be a reason why that's happening.
Right. And I guess I'm concerned that it is a blanket cattle call of who wants to be an FTO, as opposed to any real targeted approach to recruitment for the FTO program. Certainly, if we're trying to increase diversity of who's in, and we don't know what the demographics are of the FTOs right now because they didn't answer the question. And so, that's at least a red flag for me, if you will, that it's just a blanket, let's just call anybody and see who wants to do it, versus also there's some targeted approach to increasing the diversity of the field training officer program. So,
And I like the idea of that being targeted in some fashion, that that they target the people that they want to do that instead of just that blanket who wants to volunteer.
love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I don't want to make suggestions. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on the idea. And Commissioner Andrew Whitten, maybe you have some ideas since you oversaw a training division, either the difficulty or the viability of not only doing a targeted approach, but having an open call, but then specifically trying to reach out to officers of color as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. In addition to incentivizing, I would be curious about that answer if they get a shift differential pay or a shift stipend or something when you have a trainee there. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure in an old organization that was the case. But there's a balance here of putting new recruits in car with a police officer that doesn't want to recruit in the car, and whether that's going to have a healthy outcome, right?
Sure.
So it is important that they're willing to do the job and have a drive to do the job. But I do think there can be a more targeted approach, one, to get the diversity and to get those best officers who are motivated to do it. And then the other piece is broadening the pool of potential trainers, because the other thing that occurs is there's a real constantly hiring in law enforcement right now, right? There's a lot of turnover and you're always behind. So you always have someone in your car with whom you're always training. And some of those officers just want to go work a shift without having that person with them all the time. So that might be another area to look at, is having more trainers so that they have some downtime when they're doing their job. Anyway, there's a few issues.
Right.
Hey, as a technical question, is anybody else hearing popping? Are we getting feedback? Is everybody getting that?
Yeah, I think so. So I don't know where it's coming from.
I think it's the Russians.
And this is just a question that I have no idea of the answer. Does Salt Lake City PD typically ride one person in a car?
Maybe Tanya knows, but I think that's a typical protocol. Barring.
That I know of. Yeah, that's all I've seen. It's like one officer to a car.
Okay,
Then they have the backup, their partners in another car patrolling a different area. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
And then you get different combinations of who's available on different responses. So
Right.
some officers who may not be comfortable working with each other may draw that other person as a back, which is going to be another factor in their mind. And then when the recruit is in the car with the field training officer, even though there's two officers in the car, it's not typically considered to be a double car because the trainee does not yet have the experience be a full-fledged backup officer. In fact, they can be a distraction rather than
right,
asset, depending on their skill set. So,
okay,
not trying to besmirch them, but you can imagine that as a trainee.
right. Yeah, no, thank you. That's helpful. And I appreciate the idea of just creating more FTOs that are available, who are available as needed. And I think, as we also consider the budget, that's another consideration that can be included in this, right? That there are FTOs in the waiting, for lack of a better term, that can be utilized to provide some backup and opportunities for other folks to, step back for a moment. So it kind of rotates through. And I don't have any idea how long, what's the cycle, what's the rotation of an FTO. So maybe we can,
Hey, Dante, that 21st century document, that last part on the training section talks about an FTO program, and that's something
Right.
maybe we should want to check out at
Mhm.
Reno. And I looked into it. I think David said he'll get a lot of money so he can bring it in. No problem, buddy. Thanks, David.
Right. Okay. We're going to get to that document in just a second. But I think that's helpful.
Hey, and just as a general theme about that budget, you asked the question about the meeting with the training captain, and I felt the same with Lieutenant Zayas, and even in some other responses from the department, almost a defensive, this is why our budget restrictions are why we're not delivering the product at this level. And I would like to, I don't know exactly how to articulate this, but if there was a wish list, if there was like, what could it be like? And then we could make budget recommendations and see what of that could be funded, right? So instead of having that artificial limit of what's currently available, let's think big about what it could be, or what, because I think that those officers and administrators probably have some good ideas. I'm confident they have good ideas that they don't think can be executed because of the financial restraint, and they've been practicing that way. I would like to find a way to drill down to get a more broad answer.
Okay, no, that's great.
I fully support that. Be innovative, think big, what could really help us? And again, going back to that document, it says, how can we use technology and training, blah, blah, blah. So definitely.
Right, and if they're building from a zero-based budget, they get to take a look at that for real, right? Welcome, Commissioner Kaili, and happy day before Thanksgiving. And so we're just talking about the presentation by Captain Mortgus and just field training officer program and some questions that we had in that regard. I have requested in the first response from Lieutenant, I believe it's Arnott, about just their program and process. One of his, a couple of his things. One, he said that the requirement is there is a requirement, so they must have a sufficient time as a police officer. So, what is that? What kind of time and grade is expected or required before someone can apply to be an FTO? I think is an important question to ask, just to get a sense of what their expectations are. And then he said that there is significant instruction on bias, equity, and understanding learning behaviors, so that each FTO provides fair and balanced evaluations for each recruit. Again, I've requested the curriculum so we can see what in fact that really means. What is significant to them might not be significant to anybody else. So just to get a sense of what the curriculum actually looks like, I think would be helpful for this conversation.
What happens when you give the technical people the
did I freeze? Who froze?
Oh, this is a way to end things early. And now Dante's talking to us, doesn't even know he's on mute.
Dante, you're
It's
on
even
mute.
better.
You muted, Dante.
It starts me on mute. Okay. What you missed? I was brilliant what I said, so I'll try to repeat. No, thanks. Other thoughts on FTO program? Let me just maybe see if I can frame what I think is a clear suggestion or recommendation that we would be making, which is that there needs to be some very targeted outreach to officers of color to see if they would be interested in the FTO program. Is that a fair statement? That would be a recommendation, or at least a foundation of a recommendation? Okay, great. Any other thoughts on the FTO program? Any questions that you have or any additional data that you're thinking of that might be helpful?
This may be a little bit ethereal. One technique that I would use for encouraging officers to take different positions within the department, because I thought they'd be a good fit, is trying to identify the what's in it for them kind of factor, right? So yeah. I'd be curious on like the promotion and transfer policies or practices for the department. I think they're probably a behavioral based question. Like, tell us about a time you mentored someone and what were the results, something like that. So maybe drawing a connection between your own career advancement and opportunities and taking on these different assignments, because man, training somebody one-on-one is a gold mine of opportunity for problems to overcome to find success, which will really fit into some of those other processes. So maybe a more creative marketing campaign, why it's good for the community, it's good for the department, and it's good for you, which is why you should be an FTO or something along those lines.
No, that's great. Because everybody's always wanting to make sure they can get some good stuff in their file. So how does this impact their ability if they want to take a sergeant's exam or move up in general? I think that's great. Thank you. That's a great example. Okay. If there's nothing else, or we can come back to the FTO program if necessary, I want to turn to the report on 21st century policing that Commissioner Prospero referenced already. And I know I've sent it to each of you at least twice, so hopefully you've had a chance to read section 5, or pillar 5 anyway, which is training and education. So I'll just pause and let you step into the conversation regarding what you digested from it and what you think can be relevant here in the work that we're doing.
My son just made a grand entrance with colorful language that I'm glad I had the microphone on mute, so I'm sorry for my distraction.
We'll put him on camera. We'll take care of him.
He's disappeared now. I'm not going to find him the rest of the night. Anyway, I apologize.
All right. So thoughts on the report? Or any of those recommendations really jump out in the work that we're doing here?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. A lot of those are, Fed level stuff. DOJ should do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But the one that we just talked about, and I guess we go back to, again, is for FTOs or PTO, I think as they called it. But I really like that number 2, which was looking at, how to engage community members. Right? And I like the way, they talk about having a toolkit. Let's have a toolkit. And what does that toolkit should have? It should be, including community members in learning what law enforcement is doing, and to be part of that evaluation training. I'm big into participatory research, and so if I want somebody to evaluate me, I definitely want the people that I'm evaluating to be part of that, to give me their lens, because I'm coming out from an outsider. Also, I like the part of allow community members to provide that input, not only on the content, but how should it be delivered. Right. A lot of times, we got, I think you guys should learn this stuff. Well, that is interesting, but as community members, this is what I think y'all should know as well, and how y'all could learn from us. Right? And then that last part, and this is where we keep bringing up the possible pairing of commission members and law enforcement. But that having community members participate in the training, alongside with them, whatever that may look like. Again, for me, that really builds relationships, builds a better understanding of each other. I like using, we humanize each other, other people don't, but just start, we're very similar. We definitely have some differences. Let's figure it out, because most of us have the same goals. We want a safe community. We want the welfare of our children to be at the utmost. So let's do things together. And so I really like that part, that number 2, especially because I feel that really just resonates with what we're tasked with. And how is it that we can give recommendations based on that to PD and see, what can they do about that?
Great, thank you. Reverend Davis?
Yeah, and I would echo that perhaps a way of doing more of the community involvement in the training would be key to any kind of meaningful change that we're going to make. So I agree.
Thank you. I can give you an example. Some of the work I did when I was in Portland, we involved community members in a couple of different ways in the training division. And they weren't independently training, they were co-training with, it was at the time, it was a captain in the police department who, well-respected in the community and other things, but they were co-training on not just, equity and implicit bias and other things, but also some additional community members were able to come in and tell stories of their communities, because many of the new cops have no clue about the history of the communities that they're about to serve. And so really hearing from those community members was often an eye-opening experience, and change the dynamics some, so they would have a better understanding of the communities that they're about to serve. And so it's an ongoing process, an ongoing program where there's community trainers at the academy.
And that also introduces what should be another area of development in the department, but it starts to then demonstrate the strengths of that community, right? So a white officer who works in a community of color with which they have no other connection, responds only when things are bad, right? So it's hard to get a perspective on the strengths of a community and why anybody would actually care about where they live, right? So that would at least start that process of seeing the strengths and seeing positive members of those communities, and starting to have that exposure could really start to turn that attitude about why that officer should be serving that community, because there's strengths and there's wonderful people there who deserve quality policing.
Right, great.
And I think that's particularly important in this community where there's no section that you can say is where the African Americans are or where the Hispanics are. We're all over the place, but it's just one here and one there. And I think to those kind of accounts would be important.
Right. Although I think, and I'm not there, so y'all tell me if I'm wrong, but there's clearly seems to be, at least in the research I've done, the people I've spoken with, there's a clear divide between West Side and East Side. I don't think that's a question.
Right. No question about that.
You don't see Commissioner Prospero, he's repping his West Side t-shirt on, so. I mean, so even in that regard, you know, without even disaggregating who lives on the West Side, you know, Pacific Islanders are here and Latinos are here, but it's just West Side versus not. And so I think even just that conversation, it would be important to have and at least speak to, right?
And the intersection of socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
That's classism is huge, and it's often connected with race, ethnicity. And so for me, that's a big piece of that. Because you could be white and live on the West Side and still feel like you're oppressed.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. No, that's great. And in addition, maybe separate from this commission specifically, but you know, talking about the recruits who are even getting hired and put in the academy, we have now, at least in Portland, and I say we because I was a part of the process. It's not just police officers who are evaluating and deciding who moves on through the process. There are community members who are sitting on the panels evaluating individuals and whether they should move forward. And I will tell you that initially, the first year or two, there was a big disconnect between the cops sitting on the panel and the community members sitting on the panel. And cops have no greater weight in this than community members do. Because it's not about evaluating their understanding of strategies and tactics, you know, and, you know, cover, because they're going to learn that. It's the evaluation of who they are as a human being and what is their understanding of the communities that they're going to serve and who are they, what have they done? And that's a very different evaluation as opposed to, you know, how many ride-alongs have you done? And, you know, do you have a degree in, you know, so anyway, that in itself changed the complexion literally of who was moving into the academies just by virtue of adding community members to the panels of interviews. And I don't know what the process is in Salt Lake City, and that's not specifically training, but I think it's a huge connection to the training.
We are drilling into, I totally agree with you, by the way, and we're drilling into a hiring process and some of the questions asked during that process. Do they just elicit whether the candidate has common sense or can articulate their thoughts, or they have good observation skills, or high emotional intelligence, or whatever the factors we're looking for?
Right.
You know, a lot of departments use kind of trainings where if you already, they're law enforcement based, so you almost have to know other law enforcement.
Right.
And I mentioned this on the other side, that it's largely a white institution, and so who has access to that, right? So then it becomes a barrier for communities of color. It's difficult to recruit oftentimes members of the communities of color to want to be in law enforcement in the first place. And then we put another impediment there, right? So it's just the basic. So we're asking for some of those interview questions to evaluate just that same thing, but that diversity on that committee is a great point, or a community on it.
Right. And it also included, I mean, it wasn't just external. I mean, there were city employees who wanted to come and sit on it. So, I mean, the email saying we're looking for, you know, members to sit on this went internally as well as externally. And so, you know, it was a very different makeup of that interview process. And I would also suggest, you know, questions around the background investigators, because they typically are just ex-cops, and who they look like, and what's their evaluation criteria. And so, I mean, all of that plays into where you see folks of color dropping out of the process, right? I think I digress a little bit. Let me go back to the report.
Hey, while we digress from number two, on number one, talking about those high standards of training, it made me think about the absence of an evaluation of in-service training. And like a thought I had for the training captain might be, that Mo's alley more than mine, but even just a pre-test and a post-test or a follow-up, did that training help you do your job better? Ways they can look at the effectiveness of the training rather than just putting a set of information in front of the officers. Actually ask the question, was this helpful? Did you pay attention in the class? Like, do you understand what we were trying to convey? I think that's a quick way that kind of goes with that concept about those high standards for training, is that evaluation piece.
I think that's great. And because the questions answered, I think, from at least in writing about evaluations, only really addressed the recruits in the academy. And after they came out, we're going to ask them in 12 months how they thought the training was. And then we're going to ask them again in 36 months, in 3 years, how they thought the training was and whether how relevant it was, because they'll be maybe more inclined to be honest. Well, are these not, and I mean, they can't be really anonymous because you know who was in the academy, but they didn't really address the in-service component as you're describing.
And for a lot of those training classes, I don't know anything about Salt Lake City's training, so it doesn't reflect theirs, but in my experience, sometimes the most important thing you did was get your name on the roster so you got credit for being there.
Right.
And if that could be, you turn in a post survey to get that credit, then at least you can start to get a little bit of data.
No, great point. Great point. Thank you.
That is so easy to do. So easy.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah. Other thoughts? So we've got in these section 5.2 anyway, which is specifically about the training and components with community members in it. Anything else?
So
I'm sorry.
I was going to mention 5.3. Did I cut anybody off on 5.2?
I don't think so. I think we were good with that. 5.3.
That's the leadership component, right? Which I think is hugely valuable, because leadership doesn't have to mean positional authority. There's a lot of good leaders that are line officers that really represent the department well, a lot of different ways that leadership is manifested. And I would want to ensure that part of that leadership also contains a problem-solving element with that, because I think that's part of leadership, is overcoming some of these issues. And that could go so far for officers in the field who are facing a set of circumstances where they're just not sure what to do. But if they had a model or some sort of a process that they could unravel that is accepted by the department and looking for positive outcomes, I think we could really increase the legitimacy of service in the community. And I don't know if that dovetails with leadership, but I think that's a critical piece of information that can really help improve the services.
Reverend David? So let me ask a question related to that. And I certainly appreciate that problem-solving element and your description of leadership, which has nothing to do with rank necessarily. But what I have found and seen is that most cops want to know the black and white. What can I do? What can I not do? Right? And that gray is where we find all of the difficulty in some of that discretionary. I mean, I've seen some outrageous stuff, and the response is, well, I followed the reg. Okay, that's great. But you didn't have to, because you had another way you could have gone with this. So how do we see implementing the idea that there is discretion that you can use? You didn't have to handcuff the 10-year-old girl, right? I mean, what kind of discretion can you have used, and how do we give them permission to use it?
This community engagement piece. So I see some of that problem solving autonomy also connected to community engagement. So I was looking for the number on the thing, not that that's important. This department still has to have the parameters. There still has to be a set of acceptable actions within that. But what happens a lot is an officer goes to a call. So one philosophy we had in the sheriff's office, they probably have it elsewhere, I don't know, but it's the reason that the person called the police is because they didn't know who else to call.
Sure.
So what they don't want is, this isn't a police matter, why are you bothering me, right? And I don't know what percentage of times that happens, but it does happen. So the person gets shamed for calling, and then they don't want to call back when there is a police matter, because we don't want to bother our police department because they're so busy, right? So if we gave just a set of skills with problem solving on even listening to the person and getting them connected to the folks who actually do the work that they call the police to assist with, and they can take the lead and solve their own problem, and you've still delivered a service, right? So I definitely hear you when you talk about those bad outcomes where there was discretion, because I agree with you. The law enforcement is really good at trying to find the workaround, which is why we constantly have new case law, right? And quite frankly, some of these outcomes that led to this commission. But I think a healthy model within a set framework of what's acceptable within your discretion could go a long way to increase the service. So I think there's a space there for that in a positive way that would reduce those negative outcomes. And I'll tell you one more story. It was engaging the community, right? So community policing. This is a war story way back machine, but I had officers supervised by a sergeant whose job it was to engage the community, and they struggled with exactly what that looks like. Like, how do I actually do that? How do I have that conversation? And the sergeant would just come back so frustrated, and Chief, you just tell me what to do and I'll do it, because I want to do what you're asking. I just don't know how.
Right.
Keep trying. It's going to be a struggle, but we're going to get there. So back to Mo's point earlier about training to give them a toolkit, right? So that can be that problem solving, that can be leadership, that can be what's accepted in the department to actually try to address some of those issues. I think collectively, that could go a lot to increasing that legitimacy of police in the community, which in some ways is at the heart of the gap of what we're talking about. The community doesn't really believe law enforcement is going to solve their problems, or if they call them, they're going to make it worse in some cases, right? So anyway, trying to articulate, I think I'm hearing what you're saying and trying to articulate the separation there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
What? Yeah, and I've experienced that with law enforcement. Tell me exactly how to do it.
Right.
And like you said, Dante, give me the black and white. I see that with educators as well. Just tell me what I'm supposed to. So I'm wondering if it's more of a process that you teach them, right? That problem solving process. You get there, you see things, you assess it, come up with a solution after you interact with it, then you evaluate it and make sure you document so you can evaluate it. It's that problem solving process. It's not necessarily, because you're not always going to have the answer right then and there, right? It just depends on what that situation is. And they'll tell you that. Hey, everything's different. Every time you show up there, something happens. Exactly. But if you have a protocol, a nice process that you follow, and always trying to go to a way that really assists community, keeps everybody safe, including yourself, I think that's where it really is helpful. But it really does have to be pretty black and white, because I have seen that, and I always make, I like to make fun of firefighters because everybody loves firefighters, whatever. But I'll invite firefighters and I'll invite law enforcement at these community events, and there are firefighters out there playing with the kids, kicking the ball and just having a good time. And my law enforcement guys are, we're doing community, with their flat grass, or we're out here in the community.
Right.
Get out there, go. And it's like you have to tell them specifically exactly what they need to do. And so that, I think, is part of that training, is show that process. What exactly does this look like? And I think if we have community members in there, they'll tell you. man, you know what?
I don't know, but he's thought about that and doing. Yeah.
Sounds like David's
Dante.
gonna say something.
Yeah.
Sorry, okay.
So David is gonna say something, so he stopped the recording.
If I could, before you go, David, if I could get, I think it was Commissioner Hawkins. I want to make sure whatever you said was recorded. So just if you could repeat what you just said.
I have no idea. I was just in a moment. No, the chief was trying to get this started. You know, the officers bonding with the community, getting to know each other, talking, being a fireman, you know. But that was before COVID. So I don't know how you could go about and get to know the community with COVID happening right now.
Right.
Well, service calls there's a lot of them that are still face to face.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of opportunities to take the time to have that conversation. And I think something to address is the number of stacked calls that they have, the number of calls that are always holding, right? And maybe we have a conversation with the community about what their expectations are of a police response, and maybe they'd be willing to wait another hour. The several hours they're already waiting if the officers had more time to engage in those ways, right? So racing to clear all the calls isn't necessarily the best approach for the best outcome, right? So yeah, there's lots of face-to-face. There can be programs, but true community policing is top to bottom of the department, every interaction you can get.
Yeah. Thank you. David?
No, Steve said it. I think Steve raised this point in the policies and practices subcommittee as well. It's the training is critical, and it's the interaction. And I love what Moises said about the process. But if officers are feeling like they have to get done with the call because they have another call waiting for them, and there is a lot of community pressure around that, and we've seen some of that play out in the press recently about response time, then the training won't be as effective because officers won't feel like that community interaction is prioritized, right? It's what's prioritized is getting done with this call so I can get to the next call. And that's what Steve brought up earlier.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point. Thank you. Other thoughts? Other components of the policing report that resonate?
You know, they do have that part about addiction, training for addiction. I think we've talked about it. We could bring all the areas that we talked about: mental health, substance abuse, disabilities, all that. I think and we've talked about that. How is it that we could put that in training is another, but it's neat to be able to point to this document and say, hey, these are one of the recommendations.
Right. I think specific to Commissioner Andrew Ridge's just point about connection and David's point about, will they be racing from call to call and the social interaction disappears. 5.7 is very specific about there should be training and a component that includes how to improve social interaction, not just, strategy and tactics. And so there needs to be a strategic approach. I mean, it's a shame you have to say to people, we have to teach you how to socially interact, but I mean, on some level, I think that's really what we're talking about but you also have to your point, give them time and the space to be able to do it. But once they have the time and the space, how are they comfortable in fact doing it?
Yeah, and it is a skill. It is a skill set within. Well, it's a skill set to have good social interaction skills that I violate all the time, talking over other commissioners. But also within the context of the department, you're wearing your police uniform representing the department, and sometimes the way you're supposed to act becomes a stereotype that's reinforced. It needs to be specifically articulated that no, it's okay to show emotion. It's okay to be human. It's okay to have that empathy, so that we can have that healthy interaction. And that was a specific recommendation I was looking for when I was telling that story a minute ago. It's a skill set that needs to be imparted, and then permission given, within the culture of the department to behave that way.
Thank you.
It just reminds you of, in schools and education, best practice is start teaching social emotional learning skills, right?
Mhm.
Being our own identification, self-regulation of our emotions, good interpersonal skills, and then problem-solving skills. I mean, that's the package that I wish I had when I was a kid. I would have not been as much trouble as I was when I was a kid and now. So I think as adults,
We
that's
all wish you
perfect.
had that, Mo.
So when I read this fits, and that's some of the best literature. There's so many meta-analyses supporting social emotional learning that as adults, we need it too. And then for me, I just think it really is a hard balance, being the authority figure and yet still being able to, show empathy and be able to balance this. It's, that whole Aikido kind of thing. It's tough. And so for me, it's asking a lot, but that's your job, right? That's what you've selected to be. And so I like what they talk a lot about in this report is a lot of the, we call it interactive scenario types, scenarios after scenarios after scenarios. That's how you learn. Again, best practice in all our programming is you don't just sit down and listen to it. You practice, practice, practice. Why are our sports so good? Because they practice, practice, practice. In the military, we would practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
So I think they have to do that.
Yeah, you do what you practice. You do what you practice. I do want to make sure I provide some space for Commissioner Kaili to offer her thoughts on this big conversation. I know she has a wealth of wisdom, and as much, given the work that you do and the clientele that you serve, and the interactions that police often have with your clients and you, just want to make sure that we get your thoughts on how you see the social interaction component of this in the training department.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to just agree with what everybody else has been saying. The part that really stood out to me was the community engagement, and I know that we've been having this conversation a lot just about the trust component, in the community, and how do we do that and how do we engage with the community. And I think one of the things that comes out a lot is that in conversations I've had is that a lot of community members feel like that the interaction between them and law enforcement is never really authentic. So they do show up to community things, and they do, and they'll do presentations and they'll ask questions, but a lot of people feel like it doesn't come from an authentic place. And so it's really hard for them to really share what exactly it is that they are wanting from law enforcement or how they want to engage with them, because they feel that the environment in itself and where these interactions take place are not very authentic to begin with, and so I think I mean, just listening, I agree with what everybody is saying about this community engagement piece, but I guess that one of the questions is, how do we make that truly authentic so that it's sustainable? So that after our work that we do here as commissioners, how do we ensure that that continues to happen and it's not just once, it doesn't just happen once. And I know that that's something that has come up when we, in talking to different people about the listening, hearing kind of listening sessions that we're going to have. And that's been the question is, this is not the first listening session. There have been many and nothing has happened. So why would we put ourselves out there again to be engaged in this process? And I haven't really heard anything in looking through the training that and this comes back to what we've been talking about, the interpersonal interaction, that there hasn't really been any kind of emphasis on how they do that. and it is a skill. I know in working with teachers every day, we talk about that the key to engaging great students is to build relationships, and you actually really have to teach what that looks like. You know, how do you build a relationship and engage relationship with students in the class so that we can get the kind of student outcome that we want? And we talk about it all the time, but it really has to be a direct skill that we have to train our teachers on what this looks like. And we have to model it for them over and over and over, and then have them do it. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
guess that's just where, you know, I'm looking at and coming from, that if we want the officers to do this, or law enforcement to do this, there has to be a modeling of that over and over so that it's happening throughout and consistently.
Mhm. Oh, great point. Great point. Thank you.
So I have a question for you. How many hours approximately do you train those teachers? You know,
Yes.
I mean, because I was looking at the training, the curriculum that they have here for the academy.
Mhm.
I was just wondering how
Yeah.
long.
And the thing that's interesting is that we don't go according to hours. We train
Oh,
according to what we see every time we observe. So we observe and evaluate, and then they're consistently trained, like always, right? And so and not only do they, so we do the overall training that everybody has to do, then we do individual coaching based on the area that that teacher is struggling in. And then on top of that, then we do more professional development, professional learning from the data that we receive. So if the data, let's say we do a training where all of the teachers are training on teacher clarity, and then the data comes back that 2 or 3 of them got it, then we have to do retraining. So it's consistently a evaluation of the data over and over, and then the data informs the kind of training that we do, and so it changes all the time because the
I
kids,
love that.
you know, the students are different all the time, so
Oh,
the
yeah.
data is always going to be different. So there's not one set of ways. So I think that there has to be multiple ways that we approach this, because not every officer is the same and not every community is the same.
True. Okay.
Great. Oh,
Thank you. That's great.
Oh, no, Pezzi, you're making me cry, man. That's exactly what data-driven interventions. You
Yeah.
get the data and you don't do it for a project. It's lifelong. That's just what you do all the time.
Yeah.
And at the individual level, that's the process of problem solving, right? This is the data I'm collecting as I'm working, and therefore I'm going to do this solution. Thank you for making me cry today.
Go West Side.
Yeah, Dante, kudos for drawing that out too. That's a good observation.
Yeah. And you know, what just is rolling around in my head is in all of these interactions, and certainly, you know, police, as they're thinking about how we're doing what we're doing, they're already ready to be defensive and defend what they do. So are we listening to understand, or are we listening to respond? Right? Which are we doing, and how do we improve the listening to understand? Because we can all listen to respond and defend what we do and how we do it. But how do we improve the just listening to understand?
Also, Dante, is it possible? I like when certain fields learn from other fields, right? So we can get out of our box. Is what Anapesi was describing. I've really seen a change in school culture. They used to be very punishment oriented, right?
Mhm.
And man, they have just really started to switch. They're really starting to bring in more sort of internal for practices in there. Like having coaches, wow, what a difference that has made. If we could, if what do you guys think of having something like that kind of model? I don't know if on the best, if you could put something like that together, like what you guys are doing, what you just described. And does that translate? I'm sure some will, some won't. Would that translate to be a model in policing? Right? That coaching is just so big, and it's based on the data, right? And we all have to trust what we're doing. We did that with therapists because therapists were not doing what they're supposed to do in therapy. They said they did, but they weren't doing it. And so we started to do that, and wow, the outcomes just flipped. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but I think that'd be at least like a model to boom bring in to the PD.
Yeah. And how are these field training officers, going back to them, trained on how to be a good coach? And what does that mean? And what's the process to do that? Right? I mean, I have no idea. And so that, you know, seeing the curriculum, I think would be helpful. But again, it's not are we trying to be transformational or are we trying to be transactional? What are we doing? Right? And what's the process we're setting this up to set the FTOs up for success, which then makes successful recruits? Right. Okay.
I noticed that we skipped 5.6. It's this thing called crisis intervention something.
Yeah, the CIT.
I don't know,
Yeah.
Sherry, if you've seen that before. It talks about police academies all having CIT so that every officer coming into the profession has that. And I totally agree with that. And that's not the way Utah is structured. I don't believe they have CIT within post. Just talking with the department trainers or the laterals that come in. So laterals are really nice for a department because they already come with their police certificate. You can give them an abbreviated version of what the expectations of the department are and get them to work, right? So I think it's worth the week of time. I think it's a week, Carrie, for that training for those officers. And perhaps they can't do it immediately upon hire, but set an expectation that within a year of service with the new department, that the department has an obligation to get them through one of those sessions. Because I think that's something that can't be missed, you know, and sometimes those senior officers come in, no disrespect intended, but with bad habits that they've developed over their career with a different department, with a different culture, that would be critical to have that CIT in a short window of time.
Sherry, I welcome your response.
Yeah, so what best practice indicates is that every officer should have mental health training and de-escalation training. But even though it sounds great to have every officer get the actual CIT training, it is best to treat CIT as a specialty so that officers self-select, they choose to be CIT trained. This is actually the model that is used for SROs, that they have a certain amount of time on the street. They go through the initial training, have time on the street, and then they choose if they want to work in a school and work with youth. And there is a big difference in having law enforcement officers self-select to say, yes, I want to work with this population. And so what best practices indicate is have everyone get some kind of mental health training, de-escalation training, but have a specialty cadre of officers who are responding to mental health calls, and the outcomes are a lot better. And this is what Salt Lake PD used to do up until about 2016. They, in fact, ran the best practice model. And then there were a lot of changes and they decided to do their own internal training. But as it is, there's a state certification program, and Salt Lake PD officers, unless they go through that training, are not state certified. And that's where it is now. There's only a handful who are. And I have to say, I have to make one other point, that training is only part of it, but CIT, when done correctly, is there are partnerships with behavioral health, and they work together. They're in constant communication. And I'm not talking uni, I'm talking community providers. That's how it used to be. And so they're in constant communication, and sometimes mental health will respond and take the lead, and they'll say to law enforcement, hey, be there, back us up. And other times law enforcement will say, we're responding to this call, but can you respond with us? And so it is all about community partnerships and all about community engagement, so involving in the training, in the ongoing oversight, people with lived experience, family members, people who are consumers, and other community advocates. And that's really how trust is built, and people feel like, yeah, I feel confident in calling CIT. This is something I feel like I know what I'm going to get when I call.
That's awesome, Sherry. Is there a reason why Salt Lake stopped doing CIT
That was my
or being
question.
certified? And then how do we get it back on, then back training?
Yeah, David, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
You're on the spot, David.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think Sherry and I have had lots of conversations. I think there would be some difference of opinion about whether Salt Lake City stopped doing CIT. Sherry is correct that Salt Lake City integrated the CIT, the 40-hour training, into its post-academy. So all officers do go through the CIT training. We also have, Salt Lake City also has a separate cadre for, Sherry, you and I talked the other day, 4 or 5 detectives that formulate a CIT team. But where Sherry and I agree is there is this disconnect right now. And this is David Litvak's opinion. There is this disconnect right now in Salt Lake City within the police department, kind of muddying the waters a little bit. That if you go through the CIT training as a new officer, then you are equipped to be a CIT officer to respond to crisis calls. We are having some conversations about trying to separate that out. Salt Lake City Police Department will tell you they feel very strongly about all officers going through the 40-hour training, just as the kind of the base training for mental health response, but an opportunity to build out and look at CIT response, as Sherry is saying, as a specialty, like SRO, or like I use like SWAT. We have elements of that. That is the 4 officers that pair with our Community Connection Center, but there's not 24-hour coverage. And it's only during regular business hours. And so I know that the Community Connection Center is working on trying to put together a proposal to expand that so that they would have that 24-hour coverage and have that specialty in terms of that response, as Sherry has indicated.
Yeah, there's a lot with this. I mean, I'd love to have sometime to talk more about it. And I've spoken to David about having social workers working through law enforcement. And I think that's great on one hand. On the other hand, it directs people to law enforcement to get a social worker. And that's really exactly the opposite direction that we want to go. And so how can we pull the mental health system and what they offer into this conversation? And again, you don't have to take my word for it on outcomes. You can look at the outcomes, and that's partially why we're having these conversations. I think departments want to have all their officers trained, and if they want to do that, we've said that's fine if you want to do it at post, but then have them recertify as CIT officers and separate them. And what that offers is, I think departments have the idea that they get some liability protection by having all their officers trained, but they don't when they're not trained and certified by the state, when they're not receiving best practices and they're not state certified. And once they're state certified, wherever an officer goes in the state, their training holds. And right now, that is not what's happening with those who are not certified through the state program. They may think they've gone through the academy or the CIT academy the city offers, but if they try and go somewhere else with that training, they have to recertify.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sherry, you talked about it's been shown. Is there a document or documents or something like that that you could share with us?
Yeah, in fact, there is so CIT International is kind of the organization that we look to for guidance. It's the only organization that has really studied this and invested in this for many years. And last year they put out a best practice manual, and it's online. You can access it, and I can send that link to you. But it's very in depth on how to implement a best practice program, and it's very much community focused. And that is a big key that families and individuals with lived experience feel like feel comfortable contacting.
I really like that connection with community mental health.
We shared this last time. We spent about an hour and a half on the phone. So this is something that Sherry is an expert and has a lot of passion for. And I hope you heard with what part of what Sherry's saying is part of the certification issue or conversation is not just the training itself, but the practice, the implementation, the 40-hour training that Salt Lake City PD does. There's probably very little difference between that 40-hour training and if you were to get that same training through a different through CIT Utah. But the concern comes in terms of how that's implemented, the community partnerships, and that separation, like having that as a specialty, an identified specialty. And that's where, to me, I think we're having some really positive conversations about how we can improve that within Salt Lake City as well.
I fully support that. You know, I went through boot camp in the military, in the Marine Corps. They taught me some stuff, but not until I went to my infantry training and then I lived it for 8 years did I actually really know my job. That 12 weeks really didn't do anything. So yeah, I totally support that, just like the SROs, SWAT gangs, all that stuff.
And just to, I'm sorry, Dante, and just to add to my point, I agree it's a foundation, and I would like to see, I still think it's an important catch for officers who enter the department through a different route, have a baseline of mental health understanding. And particularly because even with specialty, even with diagnosed calls, even with identified calls that deal with mental health, there's a wide variety of mental health illness out there, and a lot of folks that are not receiving treatment that your street officers should have a good foundation of identifying that those factors are present, even if it's not part of a treatment plan or a solution or a crisis intervention. They can say,
Absolutely.
oh, I see something's happening here, and maybe there's a reason this person is not responding to my commands, and let's go to a different route. So I sorry to wade into that whole area, but I do think as a foundation that there's still value in that.
Oh, thank you. Just a question, David. And if you know, or you said that the specialty unit, if you will, of specially trained detectives, whomever they might be, they work basically, I don't know if the 73 shift, they just work during the day. Do you know if there's been anything pulling the data to see when the majority of mental health calls come in? So maybe there needs to be an evaluation of when in fact they're on duty.
Yeah, I think we do have that data. I don't know whether that data has been pulled and evaluated in that sense of what you're asking, but we do have that data, and that's been part of the conversation leading to that desire to see that expanded.
Yeah. Man, it just might be helpful to know. Please, Sherry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other piece with how CIT operates is that they're patrol officers who have had the training. So they're out patrolling all day. There's a call for a CIT officer. And again, whoever is closest responds. They say, I can take that. And when they get there, they take over the scene. They control, and the other officers back off. And that is really a cost-effective approach, because you don't have just a special one team that is traveling in Salt Lake, and it's very hard for them to be everywhere they need to be. But and we've never said that you have to have a certain percentage of officers trained, but some of them say 20 to 25% should be trained. But just that you have CIT officers, someone's always on call at all times, dispatch knows who they are, and they know how to get the right people to the right scene.
Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to be cognizant of time, and I think this is a wonderfully robust conversation that we're going to have plenty of time for. But I just want to kind of update you on the upcoming committee meetings and kind of what the core commissioners and we decided this afternoon, and then comment some discussion about the listening sessions briefly. So in short, in terms of upcoming meetings, we were scheduled to have the next full commission meeting December 2nd. And it was decided that given where the majority of the subcommittees are, which is deep in their work, it wouldn't really bring much to the table at a full commission meeting for discussion or decision-making or anything like that, while the subcommittees are really deep in their work. So in short, the plan is that we will stay in subcommittees through December 16th. And December 16th will be the last committee meeting of any type for the year, while the next couple of weeks are Christmas and then New Year's, and people are doing what they do, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah. And so the 16th will be the last meeting, and we'll take subcommittees through that. Then we will have a full commission meeting the first Wednesday on January 6th. And by that time, it will have been 4 subcommittee meetings in a row. So hopefully we'll be digging in and be able to come back on the 6th and say, we're ready to have at least maybe 1 or 2 recommendations for discussion by the whole commission. So that's the plan. Hopefully that makes sense and is okay. We want to give you 2 weeks because I'm taking 2 weeks, but give you that time at the end of the year anyway. So that's that. And then briefly, I want to share my screen just to talk about the listening sessions quickly, which is outreach, just in terms, just generally for your awareness of this, how it's going to look in terms of just listening. Folks can have the regular commission meetings, looking at the website for updates. So there's going to be a Facebook page that's going to happen, and information just kind of going out. And then how community members will share their voice. There's going to be several different approaches to doing that, where you can, come into a regular commission meeting, yes, to make comment, but there'll be general public listening sessions that will begin in January at the times and dates yet to be determined. And if they can't, there's going to be other ways that you can text. There'll be a text option if folks don't have the internet capability. You will be able to text the commission back with feedback and input on what's going on. They'll be able to phone a particular phone number anytime, leave a message, leave feedback. So, again, non-internet ways of being able to do this, since we're not going to be in person. And so those are essentially the 2 processes that we've evaluated and come up with so far. So just wanted to put that for you, because we're going to be asking you to share all this information with your communities and with your, connections, so we can get as much feedback as possible But just wanted to get your thoughts on how this is kind of set up. Must be great.
Hey, Dante, I just wanted to give a reminder that we had a listening session sometime in the middle of December.
Yes.
That's
and
being changed.
Yes, because it was going to be the 16th, the day of the full commission meeting. And we just decided, I mean, core commissioners, and we decided that that would be, at least from the community perspective, a really tight crunch to try to squeeze things in before the holidays and before information has really gotten out. And so wanted to give the best opportunity for getting as much feedback and input on what we're doing and how we're doing it as possible. And so decided not to do it in the middle of December.
And our overall goal is to make sure that we can make suggestions or recommendations, right?
Say that one more time, Reverend.
Our overall goal is to for the committees, subcommittees to work so that they can have recommendations that would be ready to be discussed, right?
In January, yes, one or two we thought could come from each commission. And we're also trying to be able to do that and be informed by community. So this process, some of these processes will already be up in play before that. So hopefully we'll be able to get feedback and input from community to inform what we are working on. Well, you know, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. There should be community members in the academy. That doesn't really need community input to say that's a great idea. But, you know, just other things as we begin to dig in policies, in the SROs, and just in the broadness of the work, budget or whatever that might be. So yes to your question, and hopefully we'll have feedback from the community before that.
Right. Thank
Okay?
you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Dante,
Yeah.
I know this is not on the agenda, but are we going to have officers join our commission, just like not sergeants or just, I guess, regular patrolmen?
Patrol officers, yes.
Yes.
I've had that brief conversation with the chief, and don't really know. I mean, I know he has kind of officers set aside to be able to come to the sessions and the full commission meetings. I don't know who they are. I don't know, I mean, where they sit in the hierarchy of the organization or if they're patrol officers. I absolutely think that there needs to be patrol officers in these conversations.
Yes.
Because they're the ones that are going to have the most impact with communities that we're talking about. And, you know, the command staff is often very separate from the patrol officers and how they do what they do and how they think. And I mean, they're not going to roll calls and anything else for the most part. So I will double back with the chief and see his thoughts. And if he has particular officers in mind who are patrol officers that might be willing and available to sit in the subcommittees as well as come to the full commission meetings.
Okay. And also, are we going to be able to ride along with these officers?
You can do that anytime you want. But you mean with officers that are going to be connected to the commission?
Mm-hmm.
The chief has been very open that he thinks that's a great idea. So I don't see any impediment to being able to do that.
Okay, we just have to find out who those officers are.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Tanya, were you talking about that pairing that we had talked about earlier? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. And that'll be, you know, obviously your own choice to do that. Some commissioners don't want to do that at all, and some were very interested in doing that. So I would just suggest that that would be you're saying, I would like to be paired, and who might that be? So
Well, you know, I've been on one ride along. It's very eye-opening, like what the officer went through versus being a civilian.
Mhm.
But then while talking through it, you know, the patrolman learned a lot from me where I learned a lot from him, because it's that communication that we had, and they're very open. So I think it'd be just very useful.
Okay.
I don't know what the proper word is for that. It'd be good to have. And I think I mean, if you can, just ride along, because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you had to deal with this, you know, but yeah,
No, it's an
And I know
eye-opening
that-
experience if you've never done it. Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I know the chief talked about several different ways to give a variety of ways you can interact with law enforcement that makes you that you still feel safe,
Mhm.
and yet still addresses the issue of trying to understand each other. So I
Right.
know he was working on that, and then that Langdon group came around and messed things up. So
I'm with the Gemini group. I just kind of.
oh, the Gemini group. They're in the east side, way east, on the other side of the Rockies.
Yeah, right. No, I'm on the same side of Rockies as you, I think. Okay, I got my snow out there today. Okay.
So I know there was a lot of different talks about models, but yeah.
Great. Okay. So the next 2 weeks from now will be, no, not 2 weeks. We'll have the next committee meeting next week, right? So
Right.
look
next
for
week.
look for more information. Look for another link, and we'll get this out to you. And we'll just keep doing what we do. I think it's great. We'll dive deeper into the 21st century policing report, and then really see how we begin to bring things together and see what we can really begin to compile into some cohesive thoughts about this might be a recommendation and here's how it might be framed or phrased. I think that would be important too. Okay. David, did you have something? Okay. If there's no final thoughts, I'm going to go and make sure my greens are still on the stove doing well. And I wish everyone a happy holiday tomorrow and just a great weekend. And we will see you next week.
Okay, happy holiday.
All right. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Happy holiday, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Bye.
discussion today.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cute.
Great discussion. Great. Thank you, Steve.